I want to do a little something different today and talk about cinematography. I mainly show my street photography on this channel, but actually the way I make a living is as a cameraman and as an editor. And this summer I got to work on a project with a local Shakespeare company here in Frankfurt. And every week we went out on Sundays to this garden that is here in Frankfurt called the Botanical Garden. And we filmed a scene from one of Shakespeare's plays. The reason we did that was because they normally perform in the garden every year for an audience, actually, but because of Corona this year, they couldn't. This was their way of engaging their local audience without breaking any of the Corona rules that were in place. We still try to be careful and keep our distance from one another, wash our hands pretty often, and of course, there was nobody shaking hands or anything like that. Throughout the whole process, I learned a lot. I hadn't filmed with actors in a long time, and it really took me back to when I learned filmmaking. Then I was working on short films with other people and short films for myself also. But ever since then, I've been doing a lot of corporate work and a lot of work for customers, which is just a different way of working. You're not covering a scene in the same kind of a way as you would if you're filming actors. So it's good to get back into it. I also made a few mistakes. That's part of what I want to talk about today. So let's jump right in. So when talking about some mistakes that I made, this was a scene, this is how it ended up in the final film, but I want to show you the way that I shot it was, this was a master of these two actors, and this was one close-up and another. And I think cutting back and forth between those close-ups doesn't work because they're just too wide and the background doesn't change enough. And it's very disorienting for the viewer in a way that I don't find pleasing. So later I used another lens that wasn't so wide. And you can see, I think these two shots cut together way better.
Hear of these shores?
She speaks, my lord, that maybe hath endured a grief might equal yours if both were justly weighed.
It's still a bit disorienting, but the reason why it works is because the background is changing. And you can see this in a lot of films and TV shows that it's just as important to think about what's behind the actor as what their face looks like and the lighting on them, because otherwise there's just not enough in the background to distinguish one shot from the other. And you can see this basically in every Wes Anderson movie and many, many other examples, that making sure that the background elements are different enough behind each actor will ensure that your edit is going to cut together in a way that's disorienting in a way that's pleasing, instead of disorienting in a way that's makes you feel insane. So let's look at this scene from Gilmore Girls. You see everybody has a single. There's Lorelai. And notice there's one little light in the background. Here's her mother. She's got the fire and a lamp in the background. Here's Lorelai again. And these bright spots in the background really make a difference in helping the viewer's eye differentiate between the different characters. So it's about what sources of light are in the background. Is it a bright? Is it a dark background? What are the elements in the background in terms of shapes? What lens are you using? And what's the distance from the camera to your actor? And also the foreground elements play a role too. Here you've got these two glasses. Everybody's got two glasses in front of them, but they're in slightly different positions. So basically the rule of thumb is the more variety you have, the better in terms of these types of shots. So you want them to all feel like they're in the same room, but you want there to be enough variety in the elements that are in the foreground and the background so that it doesn't make your viewer feel nauseous when you're cutting back and forth. It's a really delicate art that I think not enough people talk about, actually. But going back to my example of me doing it wrong, I didn't do this just out of stupidity. I actually wanted to reference one of my favorite shots from Psycho, which is this one cut to this one. And I think here the cinematographer really found the sweet spot of a wide-angle lens and enough elements in the background that are different in order to make this feel disorienting in just the right way. You can tell when they cut back to regular coverage, it feels way more normal. So if you have a scene where you want the audience to feel a certain tension, you got to try to pull this off with just the right balance.
I could find out countries in her.
In what part of her body stands Ireland?
Mary in her buttocks. I found it out by the bogs.
So here's another scene that I messed up.
I found it by the Baroness.
I don't know if you can see it or if you already noticed, but what I did wrong was I crossed the line. So I'll show you the scene again, and you can see here's one shot, and we're on the right side of the male actor, and here we're on the other side of her. So this cutting back and forth is actually taking the viewer to two different sides of what you could call an imaginary stage. Maybe you've heard about crossing the line, and it's a concept you're still struggling to understand. Well, this is a really classic example. This is a film called Rashomon. It's directed by Akira Kurosawa. And I want you to just pay attention to which direction, for us viewers, this actor is walking. He's walking from left to right. And notice in all these shots, he's going to start on the left side and walk toward the right side of the frame. And what this means is you could shoot on 20 different days under different weather conditions, but as long as you have the same guy in the same clothes with the same hair and makeup, and he's walking from left to right, or whatever consistent direction you choose, you can cut those shots together, and for the viewer, in their mind, they're going to all perceive that as one piece of time. But Kurosawa likes to play with this idea in the film. You can see he is also doing some shots straight up ahead, and here he really wants to show his mastery over cinematography because he's going to have the actor come straight toward the camera, and he's going to cross the line in camera. So now he's going to be walking from the right side of the screen to the left side of the screen. You'll notice in the next shot where we see the actor, he's going from right to left now. So you can either do it frontal or even from behind the actor moving straight in the same direction as the actor, like here. Or you can point the camera straight up as well. But as soon as you assign a direction to your actor, whether they're going left to right or right to left, you gotta be sure to be consistent with it. Otherwise, your audience is going to feel like this gentleman is about to feel. Now, I swear that I did this on purpose when we were filming. I know that I said it before, but you're just going to have to believe me. I knew I was crossing the line. I still did it for that moment where he hits his butt. And I thought it would be better, it'd be more interesting for the audience to see that in her shot as well as his. And I thought it would make a better edit. I also thought we were going to cover this scene differently, and that I could break the line so often that it would somehow work in the end. But we ran out of time during the day, and there just wasn't enough time on the day to cover the scene in a way that would make the breaking of the line happen frequently enough so that it would work for the story instead of just being disorienting. So I think if you want to play with the line and breaking the line, you gotta think about that example from Akira Kurosawa and do it in a way that's elegant and interesting and works for your audience instead of just bothering them. I want to go back to this scene to talk about lens choice. On this day, I was shooting with a 70mm lens and was pretty far away from the actors. I guess in each of these shots I was maybe 6 or 7 feet away. And I like the look. It helps with a lot of the problems that we talked about. It helps with the background differentiation. I think the colors look nice, and I think it's a great lens. That's a zoom. It's a 70 to 200. And I think when you're at 70 and at an f-stop of 5.6 or 4, you get a nice look. The actors are nice and sharp. The background goes nicely blurry. This compression happening. It makes the actors look good. I think it makes the wardrobe look good as well. I was happy filming with that lens until I watched an interview that changed my whole way of thinking.
Well, I've got a very strong feeling about lenses, and personally, I'm sitting here talking to you, and you're filming me from over there on a shoulder and probably a single, where I'd rarely do that, because I think, you know, the camera wants to be, to me, I would shoot singles inside here, unless it's for a particular effect, and then I'd drop back off and be more observational with a shoulder in. I mean, I think it's a totally different effect to an audience looking at somebody on the end of a 100mm lens, as opposed to somebody that's being shot on a 27 close to, or 21. So here we are, 32mm or 30mm. It's on a zoom, so sometimes you can't tell what the millimeter is. Anyway, but it's different, right? You know, it's a sense of presence. You're right there with somebody as opposed to being... I think psychologically it's a totally different effect. So
I watched that interview with Roger Deakins and kept filming, and I didn't change my style until this day. And this was the day I decided, okay, we're going to shoot this Roger Deakins style just as an experiment. And I was using a 24mm lens on the Sony FS7. Sorry, the FS7. Sometimes German comes back to haunt you. So it was the equivalent of more like a 35mm, but still pretty wide. And I was right next to these actors on that day. I think if I had just moved my elbow about 3 centimeters, I probably would have touched their elbows. And the camera sometimes was actually on a tripod that was going, one of the legs of the tripod was going between their legs or right in front of them. And I couldn't agree more. It's a completely different feeling for the audience member, and it's a completely different feeling for the cameraman or camera woman also, because when you're standing right there in front of the actors, it's way more exhilarating to watch their performances. It's way more energetic. Just, you feel like you're part of the scene. And I remember at the end of that day, I thought, I will never film anything again with these telephoto lenses where you're so far away, despite that it might be something good in Corona times. There was just something so much more kinetic and exciting for me in my work, and I think also in the results for the audience, because another thing people don't often talk about is this whole idea of where are you putting the audience, and what does it mean to put the audience in that place? And in a way, all of the actors that come on the set, they get to decide the personalities of the characters that they're playing. But the cinematographer or the camera person, they decide the personality of the audience. You know, is the audience somebody who is hiding behind the bushes and watching a scene? Is the audience somebody who is right in the middle of the scene? They're actually a part of it. They're just as invested as these characters because of their empathy and their intelligence. Or are they somebody that's so kind of afraid that they need to be farther away and have some distance to what's happening, which basically puts your audience in the position of having to adopt the personality of a peeping Tom. So I think when you're deciding what lens to use, you got to think about, do you want to turn your audience into a character that's a peeping Tom, or do you want to turn them into somebody that has dignity and that is actually a part of the world?
Now is the sun up on the highmost hill of this day's journey, and from 9 till 12 is 3 long hours, yet he's not come. Had he affections and warm youthful blood, he would be as swift in motion as a ball.
So having said all that, I did continue to film in that style. This was also shot after that fighting scene, and I really enjoyed it through and through from my perspective. But like everything in life, there were some trade-offs. First of all, I realized something that despite Roger Deakins' enthusiasm for shooting in this way, that I never heard him say, and I had to learn it the hard way, which is, if you shoot like that, you're going to have to make sure that every element is interesting. And what I mean is, when you shoot on a wide-angle lens, you're going to see everything. You're going to see the wardrobe in a way that's showing it for what it honestly is. And you're going to see the location that's going to show it for what it honestly is. And if you don't have great wardrobe and you don't have a great location, you're going to have problems. It's not going to look like a Roger Deakins film. And I think this is something that's part of his success that most people don't think about. Most people think, okay, I can just get a wide-angle lens and go out there and do coverage in a way that makes the audience feel like they're participatory and everything's going to work out great. Well, that's going to be true to a certain extent, but as you can see here, I don't like this tree branch that's behind his head there. And I would have much preferred another location where I could have had his head, you know, semi-silhouetted by the sky. I also, for my part, I don't really like his wardrobe in this scene, or hers for that matter. It's not that they're bad, but they're just not quite as interesting as their performances. And when you start shooting like this, if you want to start shooting with wide-angle lenses, and you want to be up close to the actors and to the action, you're going to have to up your production design game. And you're going to have to up your location scouting as well. You're going to have to find locations that look great no matter where you point the camera, that have nice structure to them, that allow you a lot of options. And you're going to want to get on the location as soon as possible with a wide-angle lens that you want to use, and check it out, have a look, and see how everything plays out in that location. And you're going to want to also test the colors of wardrobe. You're going to want to test how they look on film or on video, however it is you're going to be making the film that you're making. And just make sure that they look interesting. You know, you want to if you don't have cliches in your text, you also don't want to have cliches in your production design as well. And when you use a wide-angle lens, it's going to expose everything. And if you got a cliche there, it's just going to be all the more present. So let's just set cinematography aside for a second and look at a scene from No Country for Old Men to look at the production design. This is a very memorable coin toss scene from the movie, but I want to take particular note of the costumes that these actors are wearing. This collared shirt that this guy who runs a small country gas station is wearing. You know, the collar is a little bit big, which is unusual. It's not cliche. It's kind of cliche to have on a flannel shirt, but one with such a big collar adds a sort of twist to it. The buttons have this nice luminous quality. The suspenders add a lot as well of interesting features. All of these things make it interesting and not cliche. And if we look at the reverse shot, you know, these cowboy hats up on the wall are so unusual but still very believable. And the way everything's been tacked up to the wall in the background behind Javier Bardem. Also, the door that we see has been weathered. I don't know if this was built or an actual location, but if it was built, you know, they took time and they took care to weather all of these elements to make it look like they've really been sitting there for years, including you can see on this guy's suspenders from the over the shoulder, there's been some weathering done. The point is that if you have good production design and you combine it together with a sort of straight, almost documentary style of cinematography, you maximize your authenticity. Whereas if you just have one or the other, it's always going to feel like something is missing. I just want to talk also about control. So here we're watching actually the edit that was in the final film versus the edit that I did just to check the footage and how it cut together. And I think that they did a good job. I don't have anything against the edit that they did. In general, I really do think they did a great job. But let's take it back, and I just want to show you again the way that I cut the scene. So the contrast is a little different. I had a little more control over the image. The saturation is different as well. And I let this whole bit of him grabbing the watch play out differently. But I think this is a topic that cinematographers and actors also really have to grapple with, which is just that when the film's over, you're no longer in control of it. And as a cinematographer, you can control everything that goes in the camera, and you can even control afterwards how the footage looks to a certain extent, how it's handled, but you can't control what shots are chosen and when they're chosen. This was the most difficult one for me to accept how different it was in the final film. This is from the final film. And it's a scene that's supposed to take place in the afterworld with these ghosts or spirits. And so they chose this effect to use on the footage. But it's not at all how I shot the footage on that day. And I wouldn't have chosen this effect for my taste. This is how I shot the footage in the camera. And yeah, the look that I like, actually. I think it looks very naturalistic and nice. But all you can do is try to at least set up your shots so that no matter what effect people put on in the end, if you're not going to be in control over it, that at least the shots communicate what you want them to communicate, and they have a certain integrity in terms of motif and recognizability.
I am great with woe and shall deliver weeping.
Let's take a minute and talk about motif. I think motif is a subject that doesn't get taught often enough to photographers or cinematographers. And I think the best way to define motif is simply a strong motif is one that allows you as a viewer to recognize what you're looking at instantly, if possible, or at least extremely quickly. So what this means is that you want your actor to be brighter than the background, or you want the background to not be cluttered. You want them to be in silhouette, or you want them to be their profile to have a strong shape to it. You want them to have, here like in this shot, just a plain sky behind them so that there's not much competing with their shape and them as a subject, essentially. And motif was something that used to be focused on a lot in older films because you never knew how your film was going to be reproduced. So it might be shown in a cinema where the screen would be extremely dark or brighter than it's supposed to be. It might be a poor copy that ends up on VHS. You just never knew what was going to happen to your image. So you wanted to make sure that the shapes in your image were so strong that no matter how anybody reproduced it, your audience would still know what they were looking at. And one quick, easy tip to try when you want a strong motif is to get low so you have sky behind your subjects. Hope you got something out of that. I just want to say a few more quick things that I thought I didn't really need to show footage for. One of the things I want to talk about that I hear from a lot of cinematographers and people working in film is that lenses keep getting bigger despite cameras getting smaller. And even though we all have this dream that making films is easier today because cameras are smaller, and you used to have a big Mitchell camera that was the size of a small Volkswagen, whereas now you've got a tiny Sony. There's still a problem, which is that you got to lug around a giant lens like this. Now, granted, this is kind of an extreme example, but this is actually the 70 millimeter to 200 millimeter zoom that I use that I talk about in the video. So it's not crazy to have a lens this big on your camera. I know, especially if you're shooting with the Alexa or shooting some RE lenses, they're equally just as big, even if it's a prime. I tend to favor smaller lenses. The one that I'm shooting with right now is a really small old Russian lens. It's only about this big in comparison. And I like smaller lenses. I like the freedom and mobility of them, and I trust them a lot more because when you have that much glass inside of a lens, I think there's a lot that you can lose in terms of sharpness and contrast. And they try to make up for that by putting a lot of coating on the glass, but I still am the kind of person that I would rather trust fewer pieces of glass than a lot of glass that's all been coated. Another topic I wanted to talk about really quickly was the use of aperture, because this is something I don't hear a lot of people mention when they're talking about cinematography. A lot of times, like I talked about, you talk about lens choice, you talk about camera position, you talk about lighting. But I think that your choice of aperture is just as important. I think about it every time I set up a shot when I'm filming, and I change the aperture a lot when I'm filming, which usually leads me to change the ISO because I'm leaving my shutter speed the same. Why do I change my aperture a lot? I change it because it depends on what I'm filming. If I'm filming a person, I want to have a depth of field that that is perfect for just the width of that person. I want them to be in focus from the forehead to the back of their head or to the back of their shoulders. I don't want to risk it with just having focus a little shallow depth of field that only would cover the length of their eyelashes to where their eyes begin. Because what often happens is they're gonna move and your focus is gonna end up back by the ears. And I think there's also something really elegant to the idea of just setting your focus to cover the object or the subject that's in front of your camera. And this changes your depth of field depending on the distance of the camera to the subject and what type of lens you're using, whether it's a long lens or a short lens. So every time I set up a shot, I do this calculation in my head. I think, what kind of lens am I using? What's my subject? How close am I going to get to them? Some rules of thumb that's my daughter making some noise in the background. But some rules of thumb that I usually go by is if I'm filming something up close, I want to be at f8 or f11. So if I'm filming an insert of anything, of a watch, of a glass of water, of somebody's hand, or of somebody's face, I want to be at f8 or f11 because I want to make sure that that object is fully in focus. And I really think it's foolish to go out and try to shoot at 2.8 no matter what you're filming. And when I see close-ups of objects shot at 2.8, I don't enjoy the way it looks. I find that it's not beautiful any longer. It's just blurry and not in a pleasing way. So that's what I recommend is when you're close, when the camera's close, you got a long lens, go for f8 or f11. When you're far away, that's when you can open up all the way. You know, if you've got your subject, you can see the entire actor or whatever it is you're filming, a house, whatever, a car, then sure, put on an ND filter and go to 1.4 and you're going to get a great look out of that because there again, the entirety of the house or the car or the person is going to be in focus and you're going to still have a blurry background if you can pull it off with the right lens choice and distance away. About LUTs, I don't use them at all. I prefer to get it right in the camera. I've spent a lot of time trying to get a picture profile that I like, and now I have two. This is one of them. This is what my other picture profile looks like. It's just a slightly different look. I kind of prefer this one if the lighting conditions are maybe a little softer or depending on the color, just depending on what's going on. I also like this one at nighttime where if you want to get some really deep blacks as well. So just a couple different looks. I really believe in doing as little as possible to your footage in post. It's great to have the latitude to fix things later, but I try to get it right when I'm on location and when I'm filming. That's all for today. Again, I hope you were able to take away something from this. I really felt lucky that I could share what I learned and my honest feelings about this whole production that I worked on. I really enjoyed working with the team of actors and all the creative people that were behind the direction and compiling the script of all the parts of Shakespeare's plays. It was a blast to work with them. I also did it pro bono, which I feel like gives me the opportunity to speak really freely about my experience, which you can't always do when you work on a film and you get paid. You can't say things like, I didn't really like the costumes or this choice or that choice. So thanks to them for giving me the freedom to do this. I just want you all to know I really enjoyed working with you. Yeah, I'm really happy to have this opportunity to talk about what I learned in an open and an honest way. So, see you next time.